Hello to all my beautiful Gemini souls. I'm really happy you're here with me today. I don't know why, but the energy around Gemini feels very different right now. It's almost like walking into a familiar room and suddenly realizing something in the atmosphere has changed. It's still your life. You're still you, but deep down, something is slowly shifting beneath the surface. I feel like Gemini has been carrying a lot mentally lately. There are emotions you haven't fully found the words for yet. Moments where you still laugh, still talk normally, still show up the way everyone expects you to. But the second you're alone again, you start realizing you've been tired for much longer than you admitted to yourself. And the interesting thing is, I don't actually feel this as a negative energy. It feels more like a rearranging. Like life is quietly making space for a different version of you to emerge. So today, Gemini, let's slow the energy down a little. Let's open this space together, take a deep breath, and see what the tarot cards want to share with you as we move through the end of May and into the energy of June. And the very first thing I see coming through here is the Star card. This isn't the kind of energy that feels loud or dramatic. It's much softer than that. It feels like that moment after a long day when you finally close your bedroom door, sit down by yourself, and suddenly notice how quiet the room feels tonight. I feel like Gemini has been moving through life very fast lately. So fast that sometimes you can't even tell the difference anymore between what you truly feel and what's simply become a survival response to keep everything around you steady. There have been days where you kept yourself constantly busy, always something to handle, always something else to think about, messages to answer, plans to finish, another conversation beginning before your mind even had the chance to rest. And from the outside, Gemini still looked okay. You still smiled at the right moments, still carried conversations normally, still made people believe you had everything under control. But I don't think many people realize sometimes the most exhausting thing for Gemini is having to look fine for too long. Something about this recent season of your life has started slowing you down a little. Not necessarily because you wanted it to, but more like your body and your emotions no longer wanted to keep running nonstop. I keep seeing this image of Gemini sitting alone under soft yellow lights late at night. Your phone buzzes a few times, but you don't feel the need to answer right away anymore. Not because you're upset with anyone, but because for the first time in a long time, you just want a few quiet minutes where you don't have to respond to the outside world. And it's inside moments like that that a lot of emotions begin returning. Maybe it's an old memory, a feeling you ignored for too long, or simply the realization that you've actually been trying to stay strong for much longer than you thought. The Ace of Cups card comes through here like Gemini's heart is finally starting to soften again. Not in a weak way, but in the way something softens after becoming exhausted from constantly relying on logic to keep everything balanced. I think there was a period where Gemini became used to analyzing everything before allowing yourself to truly feel it. You convinced yourself that staying busy was healthy, that as long as you kept moving, kept working, kept distracting your mind with something else, your emotions wouldn't be able to catch up to you. But emotions are strange like that. They don't disappear just because we avoid looking at them. And lately, I think Gemini started realizing that. You're beginning to reconnect with the things that once made your heart feel alive. Wanting to replay an old song, wanting to stay longer inside a genuine conversation, wanting to actually feel present inside your own life, instead of constantly rushing through it. And the Lover's card appearing here doesn't only feel connected to romance. Honestly, it feels more like Gemini learning how to come back home to yourself again. To the version of you that used to find joy in very small things. The version that didn't need to fully understand everything before allowing yourself to feel it. And maybe my favorite part about this energy is that nothing about it feels forced. No one is demanding Gemini change overnight. No one is expecting you to suddenly heal everything all at once or become a completely different person by tomorrow morning. Everything feels more like a door slowly opening, very slowly, but enough for you to start feeling maybe life still holds something gentler than you once believed. And it's exactly as your heart begins opening again that Gemini also seems to be realizing there are certain challenges in your life that can no longer be viewed through the same lens as before. The Five of Swords card comes through here with a very specific kind of feeling. Not necessarily a loud conflict happening around you, but more like a quiet exhaustion happening inside your own mind. I feel like Gemini has been thinking a lot lately. Things you thought you had already moved past somehow return during the quietest moments, sometimes while driving alone, sometimes standing in the kitchen late at night just to grab a glass of water, or right in the middle of a completely ordinary day. There's suddenly a moment where you pause for a few seconds and ask yourself, am I actually okay with all of this? And honestly, I don't what's been draining Gemini is only pressure. I think it's the fact that you're starting to see certain things more clearly than before. Some relationships you once put so much effort into now leave you feeling emotionally exhausted. Some conversations where you used to stay quiet just to keep the peace now create this feeling inside you that no longer wants to pretend everything is fine all the time. And the interesting thing is, Gemini doesn't seem to react as quickly as before anymore. I see you observing more, staying quiet more often, and sometimes that silence itself surprises people. Because Gemini was never really the type to sit still inside emotions for very long. But lately, it feels like you're learning how to stay with things for a moment instead of immediately running from them. The King of Swords card appears here like a calmer, clearer version of Gemini is slowly emerging. Not cold, just more honest with yourself. You're beginning to realize not everything needs an explanation. Not everyone needs to be kept in your life. And not every battle deserves your energy. There's a very quiet kind of maturity happening inside Gemini right now, and it's not coming from reading endless advice or trying to become some perfect version of yourself. It's coming from lived experience, from situations that slowly taught you how your own emotions actually feel beneath all the noise. I keep seeing this image of Gemini sitting beside a window late at night, no loud music playing, no desire to talk to too many people, just sitting there, watching the city lights reflect against the glass, and realizing there are certain things in your life you can no longer handle through the same version of yourself anymore. And honestly, that's not a bad thing, because sometimes the quietest internal shifts become the very things that make us stronger later on. The Magician card comes through here almost like a reminder that Gemini still holds so much power inside. It's just that for a long time, you may have used that energy mostly to adapt to other people. But now, I feel like Gemini is slowly wanting to use that energy to rebuild your own life instead. You're becoming more aware of how your body feels around certain people. You're starting to recognize what truly brings you peace and what only leaves you emotionally drained. And strangely enough, the more honest you become with your own emotions, the stronger your intuition seems to grow. Small gut feelings, little moments that are difficult to explain, synchronicities showing up at exactly the right moment, making you stop and think for a few seconds, not in an overly mystical way. More like life itself is trying to speak to you in a language that feels strangely personal. And I think Gemini is beginning to notice that now, because underneath all the external noise and chaos, it feels like you're moving closer to a version of yourself that is calmer, clearer, and more emotionally real than ever before. And as those internal shifts continue happening, another door inside Gemini's life also seems to be opening in a very unexpected way. The Wheel of Fortune card carries a very different kind of energy here. It doesn't feel like sudden chaos or massive dramatic change. It feels more like the moment you begin noticing that things which have been standing still for a very long time are finally starting to move again beneath the surface. Maybe Gemini can't fully explain it yet, but I do think there have been a few moments recently where life started feeling slightly different. A conversation that seemed completely ordinary somehow opened the door to a new idea. A small invitation, an opportunity appearing at exactly the right moment. Or maybe just an inner feeling quietly telling you that you don't want to remain inside the same version of yourself forever. And honestly, that's what I like most about this energy. Nothing about it feels forced. It's not the kind of energy that says everything has to change immediately. It feels more like life is slowly placing Gemini into new spaces, so you can finally see what you truly want for yourself. And I think that matters more than you realize. Because for a long time, Gemini became very good at adapting to every environment around you. So good at it that sometimes you stayed in places that no longer fit your spirit anymore, while still convincing yourself you were okay. But something feels different now. I feel like Gemini is becoming more aware of the feeling of belonging. You're beginning to notice which places leave you feeling more energized after walking away from them, and which places leave you emotionally empty, even when everything looks beautiful from the outside. The Star card comes through again here, almost like a soft light glowing quietly in the background. Not blinding, not trying to pull you anywhere. Just a gentle feeling inside whispering, maybe I'm allowed to hope for something better. And strangely enough, the more Gemini allows yourself to think that way, the more synchronicities begin showing up around you. Certain names repeating, the same themes returning over and over again. Ideas arriving right when you were close to giving up on something important. And honestly, I don't think all of that is just random coincidence. Sometimes life has its own quiet way of pulling our attention toward the direction our heart has already known for a long time. The Six of Wands card appears here carrying the energy of recognition, but not in some flashy or performative way. It feels more like Gemini finally beginning to see your own worth more clearly. Maybe other people are starting to recognize it too. But more importantly, you're slowly realizing that you no longer need to become someone else just to be noticed. This feels like a season where Gemini is becoming more serious about what you truly want to build. Maybe it's connected to work, a personal project, a creative direction, or an environment that makes your mind feel expanded instead of constantly restricted. And the beautiful thing is, the closer you move toward what genuinely fits you, the less you feel the need to constantly hold everything together so tightly. You're no longer trying so hard to prove yourself, no longer chasing everything out of fear of being left behind. There's a very quiet kind of confidence beginning to form inside Gemini now, like someone finally discovering a rhythm of life that allows them to breathe a little easier. I keep seeing this image of Gemini walking alone somewhere in the late afternoon, a familiar song playing softly through your headphones, golden sunlight reflecting across the windows of tall buildings. And for a few brief seconds, your heart feels lighter than it used to. Not because every problem suddenly disappeared, but because for the first time in a long time, Gemini is beginning to feel like life may actually be guiding you towards something that fits the real version of who you are becoming. And as that new doorway slowly begins opening, I also feel Gemini's intuition becoming stronger in a way that's difficult to fully explain. The High Priestess card comes through here carrying a very quiet kind of energy, not loud, not trying to draw attention to itself, but somehow, the quieter everything becomes around Gemini, the more clearly you begin hearing what's happening inside yourself. I think there was a time when you doubted your own feelings quite a lot. Certain intuitions would appear for just a second, and then almost immediately your mind would step in to analyze them, dismiss them, or search for a more logical explanation. But lately, it feels like Gemini is beginning to realize your intuition may not be as weak as you once believed. There are very small moments now that suddenly make you stop for a few seconds. A repeating number appearing throughout the day. An old song randomly playing at the exact moment you're thinking about someone. A sentence from a stranger that somehow feels strangely personal. Or that odd feeling when you walk into a place and instantly know the energy there no longer feels right for you. And honestly, I don't think Gemini is searching for anything overly mystical. It feels more like you're finally paying attention to signs you used to ignore before. And the interesting thing is, the more you slow your life down, even just a little, the clearer those signals seem to become. The Moon card carries the feeling of emotions buried very deep beneath the surface. Things Gemini never fully said out loud. Sadness that got disguised as busyness. Empty spaces once filled with work, laughter, or conversations that never truly meant anything. But I don't think Gemini's body and mind want to continue living that way anymore. Maybe your sleep hasn't felt as deep lately. Or there have been nights where you suddenly wake up in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling for a long time without fully understanding why your thoughts feel so heavy. I keep seeing this image of Gemini stepping onto a balcony late at night, no lights turned on, just standing there quietly for a few minutes, watching the city become softer after midnight. And during moments like that, something inside you also becomes quieter. That's usually when intuition speaks the clearest, not through words, through feeling. A feeling that's very subtle, but very real. Like suddenly knowing you need distance from something even before you can logically explain why. Or sensing that a certain chapter in your life is slowly coming to an end, even while everything on the outside still looks mostly the same. And throughout all of this energy, the Star card continues appearing quietly in the background like a distant light. It gives me the feeling that Gemini is being drawn closer to your truest self. Not through pressure, but through a very quiet internal awakening. And the more connected you become to yourself, the less interested you seem in pleasing everyone around you the way you once did. You're becoming more protective of your energy now, more intentional about who gets access to your inner world, more aware that not every crowded room actually makes loneliness disappear. There's a very soft kind of strength forming inside Gemini right now. No need to raise your voice, no need to prove yourself constantly. It's simply that for the first time in a long time, you're beginning to trust your own feelings a little more. And strangely enough, as your intuition becomes clearer like this, Gemini also seems to be realizing that certain people entering your life lately may carry a very different meaning than you first assumed. The Queen of Cups card comes through here carrying a very soft energy. Not the kind of connection that feels overwhelming or suddenly turns everything upside down. It feels more like finally meeting someone around whom Gemini no longer feels the need to constantly pretend you're okay. And honestly, I think Gemini has been used to handling emotions alone for a very long time. Used to saying, I'm fine, even when you were emotionally exhausted underneath it all. Used to being the person who listens to everyone else, while rarely allowing anyone to truly see your more vulnerable side. But lately, it feels like life has been bringing different kinds of connections into your world. Maybe it's someone whose presence simply feels calming. A conversation that wasn't even very long, but somehow stayed in your mind long afterward. Or maybe just the rare feeling of being understood without needing to explain yourself too much. This feels like a very quiet kind of connection. No dramatic promises, no need to impress each other. It's just that when Gemini is around this person, your nervous system seems to soften a little. And honestly, that's something very valuable. Because there were seasons where Gemini could be surrounded by so many people and still feel lonely. Still feeling like you had to constantly adjust the way you spoke, reacted, or even expressed emotions, just to keep everything comfortable around you. But the Two of Cups card carries a very different feeling here. It feels naturally aligned. Like for the first time in a long time, Gemini no longer feels the need to perform another version of yourself. I keep seeing this image of two people talking very late at night. The room is quiet, soft light reflecting against a glass sitting on the table. No one trying to say anything overly profound, and yet somehow the conversation makes your heart feel lighter afterward. And honestly, sometimes the most healing thing isn't someone arriving to fix your entire life. Sometimes it's simply the presence of someone genuine enough that you no longer feel like you have to carry everything alone. The Four of Wands card also appears here, carrying the feeling of emotional stability. Not because life has suddenly become perfect, but because Gemini is beginning to recognize which places, which people, and which connections actually allow you to feel most like yourself. I think Gemini used to be incredibly good at adapting, but the older and more emotionally aware you become, the more you start realizing that peace matters more than trying to fit into every room. And maybe that's why Gemini has become much more selective about energy lately. You're beginning to avoid conversations that leave you drained afterward. Beginning to distance yourself from places where you constantly feel emotionally tense. Beginning to value the people whose mere presence makes your heart feel lighter. There's a very quiet kind of healing happening here. Not loud, not dramatic, just little by little. Gemini is learning how to receive care from others without feeling like it's a burden. And honestly, that's a much bigger shift than it may seem at first. Because when the heart finally starts feeling safer, Gemini also begins entering a new emotional space where life itself starts flowing much more gently than before. The Wheel of Fortune card returns here like a very slow but very noticeable shift, almost like the gears inside Gemini's life are finally starting to move again, after being stuck for so long beneath layers of overthinking and invisible pressure. And honestly, I don't think this is the kind of energy where everything suddenly becomes perfect overnight. It feels much more grounded than that. It feels like Gemini slowly waking up with a lighter mind, feeling inspiration, returning to things that once only felt exhausting, or noticing that situations which seemed frozen for so long are finally beginning to show signs of movement again. Maybe it's work, a new opportunity, a creative idea, a connection that feels strangely well-timed. Or maybe it's simply that Gemini no longer feels like you're fighting against life the way you used to. I keep seeing this image of someone stepping outside early in the morning, a hot cup of coffee in your hands. The city's still quiet, cool air against your skin. And for the first time in a very long time, your thoughts don't feel quite as heavy. The Nine of Pentacles card carries such beautiful energy here, not flashy wealth, not the kind of success meant to impress people. It feels more like Gemini beginning to recognize your own value, without needing constant confirmation from the outside world anymore. You're starting to understand that you're allowed to choose what brings you peace, allowed to slow down when you need to, allowed to build a life that actually feels aligned with you, instead of constantly trying to keep up with everyone else's pace. And honestly, I think Gemini has been missing that feeling for a very long time. There may have been a period where you felt like you always had to do more just to feel worthy enough. Work harder, push further, earn love, opportunities, recognition. But this current energy feels very different. Not because Gemini is giving up on ambition, but because you're finally starting to understand that your worth was never meant to be measured only by how much you produce. The Empress card appears here carrying a very soft kind of abundance, almost like life itself is beginning to respond to the energy. Gemini is finally learning how to give yourself. When you allow yourself more rest, your mind becomes clearer. When you stop forcing perfection, things begin flowing more naturally. When you stop clinging to places that no longer fit your spirit, other doors quietly begin opening. And strangely enough, the more authentic Gemini becomes with yourself, the more you naturally attract people and opportunities that actually feel comfortable to your soul. There's less pressure to perform for attention now. Less pressure to become a more acceptable version of yourself, just to fit in somewhere. A very quiet kind of confidence is growing inside Gemini these days. Like someone finally realizing they don't have to spend their entire life running just to prove they deserve to exist in this world. And I also feel Gemini learning how to enjoy smaller things again. A peaceful evening, a good meal, a clean room glowing under soft yellow lights, a few hours where you don't have to answer endless messages. It sounds simple, but honestly, those small moments may be the very things slowly bringing Gemini back home to yourself again. And as life begins flowing in this softer, gentler way, I also feel Gemini standing very close to a much deeper internal transformation beginning to unfold. The Death card appears here with an energy that sounds intense at first, but honestly, it feels incredibly quiet. It doesn't feel like everything is falling apart. It feels more like the moment Gemini finally realizes you can't keep living inside a version of yourself that no longer truly fits who you've become. And I think there are certain habits, ways of thinking, even certain roles Gemini has carried for far too long. The role of being the understanding one, the person who can adapt to any environment, the one who always knows how to make everyone else feel comfortable. But sometimes, in the process of becoming the easiest version of yourself for others to love, Gemini slowly lost touch with what your own feelings actually sounded like. And I feel like this season of your life is gently pulling you back toward that. Not too fast, not too aggressively, just little by little. There are things Gemini no longer wants to continue carrying anymore. Conversations that drain you the moment your phone screen lights up. Places that once felt familiar, but now leave you feeling strangely disconnected. Goals that once seemed deeply important, but lately no longer make your heart feel alive the same way they used to. And honestly, that's usually a sign that something deeper inside you is changing. The Fool card carries a very specific feeling here. Not dramatic, starting over from zero energy. It feels more like a fresh breath entering your life. Like Gemini standing at the edge of a road where you can't fully see what's ahead yet. But this time, instead of feeling terrified, you feel more curious than afraid. I keep seeing this image of Gemini walking somewhere on a completely ordinary day. Headphones playing softly, wind moving through your hair, watching strangers pass by on the street, and suddenly realizing, maybe I don't have to keep living the same way anymore. It's such a small moment. But honestly, sometimes the smallest realizations quietly change the way we see our entire life. The Wheel of Fortune card appears again here, like a reminder that life moves in cycles. There are seasons where we learn how to hold on tightly to certain things. And there are other seasons where growth happens through learning how to let go of what no longer belongs to us anymore. And I think Gemini is somewhere right in the middle of that transition now. Not fully the old version of yourself anymore, but not completely inside the new version yet either. And that in-between space can feel strange sometimes. Some days you know exactly what you want. Other days, everything feels blurry again. But what I really love about this energy is that despite all these internal changes happening, Gemini is still carrying a very quiet kind of strength through all of it. You no longer seem as interested in chasing validation the way you once were. No longer feeling the need to explain every emotion just so other people can understand you. Some things Gemini simply feels now. And honestly, I think that's a sign of very deep emotional growth. Because the more you understand yourself, the harder it becomes for the outside world to pull you away from your own path. And lately, I also feel Gemini paying closer attention to the things that genuinely bring peace to your mind. A clean room, a quiet evening, a conversation that leaves you feeling lighter instead of emotionally exhausted, work that feels meaningful in some small but real way. It all sounds so simple. But sometimes a person's purpose quietly begins through changes exactly like these. Not always through one massive life-changing moment. Sometimes it simply begins when Gemini finally gives yourself permission to live more honestly as who you truly are. And as that newer version of you slowly begins appearing, I can also feel the entire energy surrounding Gemini beginning to shift in a very beautiful way. It's not the kind of transformation that everyone notices right away. It's quieter than that. Small internal shifts. Like the way Gemini now chooses peace instead of trying to win every argument. The way you stay calm around things that once triggered such strong reactions inside you. Or the way you've started paying closer attention to how something actually feels to your heart. Instead of constantly trying to become the version of yourself everyone else expects. And honestly, I don't think life is always trying to turn us into completely different people. Sometimes it's simply trying to guide us back toward the real version of ourselves that got buried underneath too much pressure, too much noise, too many expectations. And maybe that's why the tarot cards throughout this reading never felt overly dramatic. The Star card, the Magician card, the Wheel of Fortune card, the Lover's card, the Six of Wands card, all of them seem to carry the same quiet reminder. There are seasons in life where you don't have to move so fast for your life to mean something. Sometimes the moment you start listening to yourself a little more honestly, life naturally begins shifting in a different direction on its own. And honestly, I don't know exactly where Gemini is right now in your journey. Maybe you're exhausted. Maybe you're trying to begin again somehow. Or maybe you're simply learning how to breathe slower after spending so long feeling like you always had to stay strong. But I think the most beautiful part of this energy is that Gemini no longer seems to want to abandon yourself anymore. And I'm honestly curious, has there been a moment recently where you suddenly realized you've changed? Maybe it was something very small, a different thought, a new feeling showing up unexpectedly, or one random day where your heart simply felt lighter than before, without fully understanding why. And if stories like this help you feel a little less alone during the heavier seasons of life, then maybe you'll want to stay here with me a little longer. But for now, let yourself rest a little tonight, Gemini. Everything doesn't need an answer immediately. Sometimes the moment your heart finally begins softening again, that alone can already become a very meaningful kind of change.